Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Gallery. My name is Nuke, and this is not Craft of the Cards. This is going to be another small thing I'm going to try and take a look at, mostly because a lot of the other new archetypes that have come out haven't really struck me in any ways particularly interesting, or at this point have had enough cards released that I will probably eventually get around doing a Craft of the Cards on them sometime. But a suggestion from an older video, I can't remember which one exactly, did kind of tickle my fancy a bit, which is to take a look at some of the structure decks of Yu-Gi-Oh! And again, this is going to be a fairly lighthearted, script-light look at the structure decks. If I do get around to doing more intense looks at them, I probably will put a lot more into the scripting, and it'll probably be a full video at some point. But until then, we're probably just going to do a very light look, especially at some of the earlier structure decks, because some of the latter structure decks especially ended up being vehicles to introduce archetypes or to introduce other cards in particular, and were really strongly themed around those archetypes, which means that they probably do fit better into a Craft of the Cards type scenario. But a lot of the early structure decks did not. They were much more used to as a vehicle to get out reprints and to have a stronger theme than a lot of the starter decks, which were usually just very basic monsters, some simple battle-focused themes, and a very simplistic way of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Whereas the structure decks were a bit more advanced. They had some nicer effects, maybe had some good reprints, while also providing some new support to archetypes in a very kind of abstract way. But we are going to be looking at the first structure deck released in Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, which is Dragon's Roar. And just giving my overall thoughts on the archetype, it's a pretty decent one. I like a lot of how it works. The theming in particular for this one was kind of interesting. It's not the strongest of them, especially if you consider some of the ones that came out after, especially the water and fire based ones. Those were very strongly themed and had some very good stuff in them, whereas Dragon's Roar especially is a bit on the lackluster side, but it does have some interesting links, especially among its spells and traps. While I first looked at it and thought that it was a very weak deck in terms of theming, a lot of the cards actually ended up revealing a pattern in a way. While there are some spell and trap cards that directly link to the dragon theme in particular, most notably Stamping Destruction, the Dragon's Bead, and Dragon's Rage, for obvious reasons. Some other cards that do tie in very well with the idea of dragons as a whole were cards like Pot of Greed, Snatch Steal, Curse of Anubis, and Reckless Greed, mostly because they tie into one of the key aspects of dragons, which was avarice. You know, you think of the dragon, you think of like Smaug from The Hobbit. You have these massive piles of gold just underneath mountains as part of a great lair, and it makes a lot of sense that so many of these greed-focused cards would be in the deck. Nobleman of Crossout is also a really good card for the deck. It helps to fit into the playstyle of dragons being a very offense-focused deck, while also tying into the theme of a nobleman being kind of related to dragons in a way. They're helping to try and kill them rather than aiding their playstyle. There are a lot of other cards in the deck as well. Cards like Mystical Space Typhoon, Premature Burial, Swords of Revealing Light, Heavy Storm, Reload, Graveyard of the Fourth Dimension, Call of the Haunted Ceasefire, and a few others. They don't really fit into the archetype too much, but what they do provide was a bevy of staples for players looking to get deeper into the game once they already bought the structure decks. Those actually don't fit too well into the theme, so that's a bit of a slight against it. But beyond that, we are going to take a look now at the monsters, which form the main thematic core of the deck. Now, some of these cards I'm not going to go into too deeply, mostly because this deck as a whole has some very strong links with the Red Eyes monsters, which do form their own independent and very good archetype, at least artistically, and I don't want to get too deep into that because that kind of robs me of material for my future videos. But going through the cards now, the monsters in particular, we are going to be looking first off at the cover card for the deck, Red Eyes Darkness Dragon. Now, this card is very interesting. It's very GX based in its design, in that it has a lot of unnecessary spikes, The background isn't the best. It relies a lot on kind of fumes and outline. It shares a lot of the design elements of some earlier Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters in that it has diamonds on its wings in particular. So, the red gems that they use to help give it a much more angular feel to it and to make it diverge a little from other depictions of dragons, which usually either go for a very weird organic looking thing or much more of a scaled thing. This one is very kind of edgy Yu-Gi-Oh! With armored plates that are segmented and black, but I do like the card a lot. GX is a hilariously edgy period for Yu-Gi-Oh! Art, and one of my favorites when it comes to design. I do like a lot of the edginess, and I do like a lot of the segmented, armored looks that they gave the monsters. Beyond that, I think the art is good. The color scheme works very well together. That particular shade of black with the orange highlights looks very nice. And I do like how the Darkness Dragon can't be summoned without tributing a Red Eyes Black Dragon on your side of the field, and it gains power from the number of monsters, Red Eyes monsters in your graveyard. It does actually make it a fairly good monster for the structure deck, given the fact that it draws power, and also fits thematically with the card as a whole, being a monster who is able to power up from the dead cards in your graveyard, fitting very well with its darkness theme. Their second monster is, of course, the traditional Red Eyes Black Dragon, Joey's Ace monster, and one of the defining early designs of Yu-Gi-Oh! This one has a lot of the elements that made the original Yu-Gi-Oh's art so much more interesting. It had a very rough, not rough at least, but very non-traditional design. Most dragons at least have way more reptilian one, but this one was heavily stylized with that strong kind of beak nose, the almost dinosaur-like segmentation of the plates in some areas, and the long, lanky, somewhat weak-looking in places, arms and legs. It screams early Yu-Gi-Oh! And the proportions were all kind of weird and interesting, and it's what helped set the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Art very much. Beyond that, the flavor text for Red Eyes Black Dragon as a whole is quite disappointing, it just being, it's a ferocious dragon with a deadly attack, which kind of determines its place as always playing second fiddle to Blue Eyes White Dragon in terms of the iconicness of its flavor text. I'm very glad that they decided not to give it the flavor text of other monsters that ended up being associated with Joey, like Alligator Soldier, where they decided to do a phonetic translation of his English dub Brooklyn accent, which was perhaps not my favorite decision. But the card does look good. It's an incredibly old school and traditional design for Yu-Gi-Oh! And one that works very well. One of the monsters that they decided to put in the structure deck was Luster Dragon. It's a very powerful level 4 vanilla 1900 beater. It works well as part of the structure deck. It's a dragon. And once again, it looks pretty good. The design as well is fairly interesting, though I'm not a big fan of the shading on this card in particular. It's something that tends to crop up a bit, at least in this kind of early-ish Yu-Gi-Oh! Art, where the shadings seem to distort the art a bit and make it look a lot, I guess, cheaper, I guess is the word to use. I'm not sure, but like it makes it look lower quality than it needs to, because it just seems like it's trying to obscure it with some fairly low quality visual effects. Beyond that, though, I do kind of like the design. It's a very vibrant shade of blue. It has those kind of strange looking wings, which makes sense given that the flavor text says that it's coated with sapphire, which means that it probably actually can't fly very much. I do really like the background on this, though. The pink fire actually offsets the blue in a very nice way and helps to provide a lot of extra flair to the card in particular. I also really do like these little white starbursts that we see around the card. It helps to make it seem more lustrous and make it seem more in theme with the whole fact that this is supposed to be like studded with gems. I really do like it, and it's a good card for the structure deck. A card I don't like for the structure deck, though, is Twin-Headed Behemoth. Once again, this is very early Yu-Gi-Oh! Some very dark and interesting designs, but one that I personally find very ugly and with some very strange elements. You can do a two-headed dragon. They are very interesting, but the decision to have them seem like really strange arms while the tiny spine coming out of where the head would normally be is one that I'm not such a fan of. It makes the art look pretty bad in my opinion, and the tiny vestigial half wings around the middle of the back are just not too great looking in my opinion. I'm not a fan of this art. I'm especially not a fan of the background of the art. It looks bruised and ugly, and I'm just really not a fan of the art as a whole. The effect is interesting, I guess. So it says that, if it's the end phase of this card is in the graveyard because it was destroyed on the field, you can special summon the card, but its attack and defense comes 1,000. It's a good effect when it comes to the theme of the card. It means that, okay, if you destroyed one head of the card, it will come back and it'll have reduced attack power. I feel like the attack power should have been halved to make that truly thematic, but it is an interesting thing and, shows an early attempt to try and theme Yu-Gi-Oh cards that I actually do find fairly nice. I'm not sure why this is a wind attribute card, though. I'm not a big fan of that, especially given the coloration. This would seem to fit much better as a dark attribute, but in the end, it's not a big deal. Two monsters in the structure deck that I'm not too big of a fan of, though, is the Armed Dragon monsters. You have Armed Dragon level 3 and Armed Dragon level 5 in this one, and I'm lukewarm on their presence. It's not that their design is bad. I actually do quite like both of their designs. Armed Dragon level 3 is a good kind of baby version of it. It has exaggerated features, a larger head. The coloration on its body is lighter in general, which helps to make it seem more petite, and the effect makes a lot of sense given that it helps to summon out Armed Dragon level 5 later on. Armed Dragon level 5 looks good. It looks like a good kind of juvenile stage of things. It works very well in terms of, like, if you were thinking of these as Pokemon, it works well as the mid-stage evolution. It looks kind of like a surly teenager with its head kind of low down, and compared with its body, it seems to be kind of squatting back on its haunches a bit. I would have preferred to see better developed wings, because I think that Armed Dragon level 3 already had these very kind of juvenile-looking wings, but if they were able to make the wings on Armed Dragon level 5 look a bit bigger, that would have been very nice. But beyond that, it is a good extension of the card as a whole, and it helps to make it seem a lot better. The effect is also really good. This one's a bit more involved than Armed Dragon level 3, showing its increasing complexity, and shows that, yeah, you do need to kind of get this out by fighting it. The reason I'm not such a huge fan of their presence in here, though, is that they do go to a different theme. Like, these are the Armed Dragon monsters. They're part of the Armed Dragon set. They eventually go up to level 7, level 10, and, depending on your purview, Dark Armed Dragon. I don't think they work as part of this because they already carry an inherent theming that isn't pushed all the way through. Armed Dragon level 7 is not a card in this archetype, and I'm honestly lukewarm on their appearance in this archetype because of that. I think that if they were going to include them, they should have put maybe a bit more support in the structure deck for them and given Armed Dragon level 7 as another, like, big beefy fat monster for the structure deck to work with. The last monster in the archetype, though, is Black Dragon's Chick. This one is quite interesting because the coloration of Red Eye's Black Dragon seems to change. So in the original art, it seems to be kind of grayish white, which doesn't really make sense. But in a lot of the other cards, subsequently, it was given, an actual black coloration. In this one, it works very well. Of course, you see it kind of emerging from its egg. It's, giving a little burst of black outline fire, which is very nice. And of course, larger head, big eyes. It's very cute. And beyond that, the effect works very well in helping you to summon out Red Eye's Black Dragon. It's Nice enough card, though. I would have preferred if the background was a bit better. I like the white highlight around the flame, but I'm not really sure where it's supposed to be coming from, and otherwise the kind of blurred gray background is kind of lazy, especially considering that a lot of the other art in the archetype seems to suggest that this would be more present in like a volcano, so I would have liked to see some more involved background art there. I lied, actually, that is not the last card in the archetype. We do still have 2 more to go, but I'm an idiot, so... Yeah, we have Element Dragon, which I actually really like. It gains power from other archetypes being on the field, so fire and wind, and seems to tie into those designs very well with both its coloration and the design of its head. The coloration does seem to, traditionally evoke a fire monster. It's this kind of pink thing, and I'm not really sure of the design of the card as a whole, though. It is very muscly, and that's a bit off-putting, but it works well enough, and the background as well seems to tie into its fiery nature. But beyond that, the coloration of the skin in between the wings, or like in between the struts, I guess, for its wings, I'm not sure what they're called. If there's, for some reason, a biologist in my subbase, could you please tell me what those bits on, like, the bat wings are called? But the head, as well, does actually give rise to a very kind of wind-focused thing. It's very lion-like, and the hair blowing back along with the horns. I'm not really sure why, but it does seem to kind of evoke a wind type thing with me. The effect is very good. The fire attribute making to increase attack makes sense with the overall theme of fire monsters, and the wind attribute helping to attack twice works very well there as well. There's a lot to like about this card, especially in terms of its design, but I do think, like, the weird muscly thing, it's kind of off-putting for me, and I'm not a big fan of it, even though I get that that might be kind of the point of this card. It's very strange, and this kind of amalgamation of different attributes may mean that it should seem kind of unsettling. It's unnatural, elements mixing together and all that. Their last monster for realsies this time, though, is Masked Dragon, and this one is very unnerving. My gosh, it's grinning at me. That's not something I ever wanted. Oh boy. But yeah, the coloration this time is truly unsettling. The kind of flesh-like tones of its underbelly with the bone-like structure of almost everything else. But the weird thing is, it lacks that kind of segmented design you would expect from bone. Instead, it is contoured to the muscle, and that's a bit strange. And that is quite scary as well. The mask, of course, refers to the bone-like plates around its face, and the rest of the card just looks very weird. I think it's the neck as well, which makes it look so very long and sinuous and creepy. That is very off-putting, but kind of makes sense, I want to say, given the theme, because it shows how, like, this is a masked dragon. This isn't something that wants to reveal itself and instead is this kind of creepy, weird thing. It's not noble at all. But in the end, the effect works very well as well. It, takes off its mask to maybe reveal that it's another dragon from your deck. It's creepy, but I actually do kind of like it. I think it fits fairly well with the card's name in general, and it deserves its place in the deck as a fairly useful dragon-type monster. So, that was my incredibly brief review of one of the most overused types in Yu-Gi-Oh! I kind of forgot to mention that at the start, but yeah, dragon types are one of the most well-represented types in Yu-Gi-Oh! History. There's a lot of support for them. A lot of different archetypes have dragon types in them. But this structure deck was fairly decent, at least in terms of theming, especially for an early archetype where not a lot of it was, like, super themed towards certain things. I do like that there was kind of a connection. Maybe it was just me reaching for it, but there was a connection in terms of, like, all of the cards that are designed around, like, gathering cards and drawing things and, like, snatching and stealing and coveting things of your opponent as well. And the presence of the staples in the deck is kind of, it was obvious. It continues even now with the common print of Ash being in the new Salamangreat decks. But yeah, so the deck is good as a whole. I enjoyed it, and that's all I really have to say. Thank you so much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to get updates on all my future videos. And so, without further ado, this is Nuke, signing out. Have a good one, ladies and gentlemen.